The United Nations says that if Israel puts in place new laws cutting ties with the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, that the Israeli government will have to meet their needs under international law. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says there is no other UN alternative to the agency known as UNRWA. A UN spokesman said on Tuesday that UNRWA has been a lifeline during the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and that the Israeli legislation, quote, will have a devastating impact on the humanitarian situation. Joining us now to discuss why Israel is cutting ties with UNRWA and declaring it a terrorist entity is David Mencer, a spokesperson for Israel's Prime Minister. David, thank you very much for sitting down with us.
Good to be with you, David.
Before we get into the comments made by the UN and the Secretary General, can you walk us through the reasoning behind the move from the Knesset?
Yes, I can. It brings us no joy whatsoever, but unfortunately the case against UNRWA is so serious that the Knesset, Israel's parliament, has taken this decision, and it's a decision which has been welcomed by the government. Firstly, the case is that UNRWA employees actually have been exposed as terrorists, so that very often UNRWA employees and the terrorists are one and the same people. Secondly, that UNRWA buildings have been used as a cover for rocket launching sites. Also, that UNRWA schools have been hijacked as dens of incitement and pro-terrorist education. And for me, the killer point in all of this fact, yes, of course, we've seen UNRWA members who actually took part in the October 7th massacre, the beheadings, the rapes, the murdering of the families, the burning of families alive. But the thing which gets me most of all, and the point which I think most Canadians probably don't get, is that every single Hamas terrorist that were engaged in those atrocities on October 7th went to an UNRWA school. They were taught their jihadism in UNRWA schools. They were inculcated with this level of Jew hatred, of hatred for humanity, actually, inside UNRWA schools. We don't want to be back here in 2 years' time or in 18 months' time fighting again against Gazans, which means that everything needs to change. It's been a year since October the 7th. We're clearing Hamas from Gaza for the benefit of Gazans and, of course, for Israelis as well. But we must have a better future for ordinary Gazans, and that cannot include UNRWA that actually perpetuates this conflict.
I think for a lot of Canadians, they may hear what you're saying, and that would resonate with them in terms of the problems with UNRWA as an organization. But what are the alternatives? What is the Israeli government doing in terms of aid and working potentially with other partners other than UNRWA to make sure that civilians do have access to aid as the war continues?
So first things first, the Prime Minister made a very clear commitment yesterday that there would be no interruption whatsoever of aid going into Gaza. To date, since this war began, more than 1 million tons of aid, that's enough food for everyone in Gaza, will continue to go into Gaza. And we'll be working with other UN aid agencies, as well as other international organizations, to make sure that those that need the aid in Gaza, and they do need the aid in Gaza, it's important to remember that, they actually do get it. So that service, uninterrupted, will ensure the aid gets in and gets distributed as well by other UN aid organizations. But there are other aid organizations. UNRWA is alone, and the Palestinians are alone in having their own aid organization. There is, for instance, the UNHCR, there is UNICEF, there is the World Health Organization. All of these organizations we've been working already with to make sure that aid is getting to the people that need it. So it simply isn't true to say that UNRWA is unreplaceable. It must be replaced, not only for our safety, but for the future of Gazans. I often think of UNRWA as a drug dealer which keeps feeding these lethal drugs to their junkies. We can no longer have a situation where Gazans are kept in this fallacy of thinking that, just hold on a few more years and we'll be able to clear away Israel, and you'll be able to take up residence in Haifa and Jaffa and other places in Israel. Israel is
We
here to stay,
we
as our
we have to go
guardians.
to break quickly here. I apologize, but we'll be right back. We're back with David Mencer, a spokesperson for Israel's prime minister, talking about the move to designate UNRWA as a terrorist entity. David, before the break, we were talking about the alternatives to UNRWA. The UN has said, obviously, that there are no alternatives. You have outlined some of those alternatives. But the UN has also said that under international law, Israel is essentially on the hook for the support that UNRWA otherwise provides. What is the Israeli government's response to that claim?
So the Prime Minister's made clear that he wants to maintain the existing levels of aid which are going into Gaza. We want to make sure that people that need this aid are getting it. But let's be clear, UNRWA is part of the past. It was part of the problem because UNRWA members actually took part in this massacre. But now it's time for the international community, and first and foremost, the United Nations, to do its job, to rethink and to do what's right in order to really step up to the plate and provide a better reality for Palestinians instead of just sticking to old ideas which don't work, in an organization which has been infiltrated, taken over, and eventually massively misused by these terrorist organizations. So Israel will play its part, but it's down to the United Nations now to provide a better alternative for ordinary Gazans.
What would you say to Canadians who feel that Canada should continue its support for UNRWA? Because there is a large demographic here who support the Prime Minister's move to continue to fund that organization. What would be the Israelis' response to those Canadian citizens?
Look, I think billions of dollars have gone into Gaza to, I think, well-meaning by the Canadian government and by the Canadian hardworking taxpayers to support Gazans. But we have laid the evidence on the table very, very clearly. Mm-hmm. And we say very clearly that if you continue to use your taxpayers' money to support UNRWA, UNRWA has been taken over by a terrorist organization. So you should be in no doubt whatsoever that rather than helping to support ordinary Gazans, you are perpetuating this conflict, and you are, I understand not directly, but the actions of supporting UNRWA is a lifeline to Hamas. Now, we know what Hamas is. They've told us very, very clearly. Right now, Hamas's only wish is to ensure that more Gazans are killed. They're not upset that there have been Gazan civilians which have been killed. They wish there were 10 times more because they feel that that will support their cause. Hamas want to hold on to power. The government had made it its prime objective, together with getting back our 101 hostages, to ensure that Hamas can no longer be a part of its governing structure or of course, its military structure. So Canadians should understand very, very clearly that we've laid out the evidence of why UNRWA is rotten to the core. It's been infiltrated by a terrorist organization. And all of us now, led by the UN, need to look for better solutions to provide a better future for ordinary Gazans. You can't think of anywhere else in the world where 76 years after this country was created, the State of Israel, obviously we've got a 3,000-year history here, but 76 years later, refugees remain. They're still called refugees. Their children are called refugees. Their grandchildren are called refugees. This is simply perpetuating the conflict. We're not going anywhere, nor are Gazans. They need a better future, but UNRWA is not the answer.
You mentioned a better future for Gazans. We have about a minute here, and part of that better future, I think, for a lot of people is a Gaza without Hamas. How close is the Israeli military to achieving that primary objective, along with returning the hostages, of eliminating Hamas as a governing entity?
Well, I'll lay it out with you in figures. We estimated that there were 24 battalions, military battalions, of Hamas. The Israeli military believes that it has destroyed 23 of them. Right now, Hamas is trying to regroup in different places, mostly in the north of Gaza, in Jabalia, where they've tried to regroup and attack us again. They've got more plans to carry out October the 7th again. Don't forget, they're a jihadi organization, so this, they're not deterred. They'll do it. It's for them. It's either victory or death. But most importantly, the tables have turned. The Prime Minister talked about the death of Sinwar being the beginning of the end of this war, because we're taking apart their leadership person by person by person. But ultimately, we've made an offer to Hamas: give back our hostages and you can escape with your life. They haven't taken up that offer, which means we're going to continue to eradicate this organization, keeping civilians out of harm's way, but we won't finish until they either surrender or we finish them off completely.
David, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be with you. Thank you.